We're on one side of the Pacific. Let's take a little trip now to the other side of the Pacific. So really excited to be hosting my good friend, Joe Cutler. So Joe is a National Geographic explorer. He's an ichthyologist, and he specializes in freshwater fish. So he just finished an incredible expedition, the Ogooue Megatransect in Gabon, in Africa. So this was an amazing journey, over 1,000 kilometers, pack rafting down this river, along the way doing transects, exploring biodiversity of the freshwater fish species, something that hasn't been done in, I think, over 140 years. And then along the way, Joe was able to do live events with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We connected with him at different spots along the river. We got to take a lot of students out to the Ogooue. So I'm going to bring Joe in with me right now. Hey, Joe, how are you?
Hey, Joe, I'm doing great. It's good to see you. And hello to everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and happy Global Biodiversity Festival.
Awesome. Well, I'm always up for an excuse to bring Joe Squared back together. So I'm going to get out of here. We'll stick with one Joe for a little bit and let you take us on this incredible expedition.
That sounds good, Joe. I'll see you in the question and answer session. So let me pull up a share screen here and let me know when you can see what I am seeing. Are we sharing it? No, we're not.
No, don't see it yet, Joe. If you can, use the entire screen option. That tends to be kind of the smoothest for sharing.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay. Hello again. My name is Joe Cutler, and today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about some of my recent work exploring one of Africa's last wild rivers. This is the Ogooue River in Gabon, and I'm really excited to share some of my experiences out there in a really wild, pristine ecosystem. So, as Joe mentioned, I'm a freshwater ecologist and an ichthyologist, which means I study fish. And I'm also a conservation biologist. And my work studying freshwater fish over the last 10 years has taken me from Mongolia to Malawi. But most of my work has been concentrated in Central Africa, in particular in Gabon. And so, for those of you who need a geographic refresher, Gabon is right on the equator on the Atlantic coast of Africa. It's in the Congolese basin, so it's mostly forested, and it's a beautiful place to explore. But the biggest river and one of the most exciting spots to explore in Gabon is the Ogooue. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Ogooue, I understand it's not the most famous river in the world, but it is one of Africa's largest. It is the fourth largest river in Africa by flow. Actually, more water flows out of the Ogooue than out of the Nile. And the Ogooue is considered one of the most pristine large tropical rivers in the world. There's only one dam in the whole watershed, only 4 human inhabitants per square kilometer. So this is really a unexplored, undiscovered, and underpopulated area. So it's very natural and wild, but it's also a bit threatened and it's not very well protected. So I started thinking about a way to explore this great river ecosystem. And it's cool. I mean, from a biodiversity standpoint, on the banks of the river, you can see hundreds or thousands of butterflies flitting about. If you pay attention and you look onto the vines hanging down on the side of the river, you will see these teeny tiny perfect tree frogs, no larger than your fingertip. And pretty regularly, you will run into the giant of the forest. So these are forest elephants, the most rare species of elephant in the world, and 90% of the remaining forest elephants live in Gabon, most of those in the Ogooue watershed. So this basin, this river system, is home to some of the last strongholds of large mammalian diversity in Central Africa. But for me, as a fish biologist, I love sticking my head under the water and seeing what is swimming about. And the thing that's amazing about the Ogooue and its tributaries is everywhere you go, see something different. So over the course of my decade of field research in Central Africa, I've had the chance to encounter hundreds of fish species. I've collected almost 40,000 fish in my career and at least 350 species in Gabon. Now, what's amazing about that is we're collecting a lot of species that are completely new to science. So we're 10 to 15% of the fish we catch on our average expeditions are undescribed, new to science. They don't have a name. So we're out there right on the interface between exploration, discovery, scientific research, and conservation, because there aren't very many people who work in this realm. So even a little fish biologist like me can inform conservation decision making. And it's important because as I've traveled through Gabon and throughout Central Africa and the world, I've seen impacts approaching these pristine ecosystems. So I took this photograph just a little ways from the main stem of the Ogooue in Gabon. And this is a gold mine, and what they're doing is they're mining in the streams themselves and filtering the sediments for gold. Now, you can imagine that this has a pretty bad impact on the local aquatic ecosystem, and all of this is flushing down into the Ogooue. In other areas, you'll come to a part of the forest that has been completely clear-cut for timber exploitation. So you can see here, the left bank of the Ogooue has been completely deforested. There is nothing left but the red soil, and all of those trees, all of those hardwoods, which took a long time to grow, are going to be floated down the river and exported. And so very little of that money, very little of the resource wealth actually will remain in Gabon, but the environmental impacts are there on the banks of the river. And another major threat to Gabon's freshwater ecosystems are hydroelectric dams. So this dam, the dam at Poubara, is the only large dam in the Ubui watershed. Now, that is really rare to have just one dam. Most rivers in California, where I live, have dams on them already. So to have a huge river like the Ogooue, mostly free-flowing, it's quite rare. But the future of this wild, free-flowing river is threatened as Gabon plans to develop more mines and more dams and exploit more timber on the banks of the Ogooue. So in order to assess those threats and study the biodiversity and explore this system so that we can help protect it, I started dreaming of an expedition to survey the whole Ogooue River. And so I came up with a project called the Ogooue Mega Transect, where we would start in the upper Ogooue near Franceville, and we'd follow the main stem of the Ogooue, paddling down the river until we reached the Atlantic. And this would allow us to stop as we went downstream, survey the biodiversity, talk with local populations, take lots of photographs, and, survey, document, and explore this wild ecosystem. So I flew out to Gabon and I met with my team, which included 7 Gabonese scientists and students and 2 American scientists. And we inflated our big raft and our pack rafts, and we launched down the Ogooue River. Now, I should tell you, before I started preparing for this trip, I had no rafting experience. I studied fish. I spent a lot of time in boats, but I had never paddled a big boat before. So going into this experience, I was very nervous, very scared of the white water. But most of the river was calm. You're paddling down a big freeway of water that's moving, and you got these walls of green forest with monkeys and birds and all sorts of life bubbling out of it. Most of it was calm. Other areas, the video got a little bit weird here, but other areas were just spectacular. So this is the confluence of the Ogooue River and the Ivindo River. The Ogooue is a huge brown river, and the Ivindo is its largest tributary, a huge black water stream that you see in the right side of this video. where they come together is this incredible mixing of biodiversity. One adapted to the blackwater forest streams, one adapted to the heavy sediment-holding Ogooue. And we had the chance to spend 2 days at this site surveying biodiversity, putting some of the first specimen on the map from this site. And it wasn't always smooth sailing. As we went further down the Ubui, we started to hear the bark and roar of hippopotamus and the slipping of large crocodiles into the stream ahead of us. The Ubui is home to all the threats that you would imagine on a major African river. It has every species of crocodile in Africa. It's got hippopotamus. It's got quicksand. It's got malaria, yellow fever. It's got all the challenges to make your blood pump. And it's also got some really serious whitewater. So as I said, I was not much of a whitewater rafter before getting out there. And you see there's a huge whirlpool coming through, you know, a whirlpool 30 feet wide that can suck down your boat, and then a huge boil. And I'm nervously paddling my way down these rapids that no one goes down. There's no, you can't Google the scouting report on how to best pass these scary waters. So we're going down this river basically unknown. We don't know what's around the next turn. And so we had to be on our toes at all times, prepared for whatever came. And we were able to pass and paddle every bit of the Ogooue except for this one rapid. This is the Chutes de Bouet, the biggest waterfall on the Ogooue. It's a little hard to tell from this drone shot, but there's a 30-foot waterfall at the head of this rapid, followed by the scariest Class 5 rapids that I've ever seen in person. And for that one, we took the dry route, which is the overland route, dragging our raft and dragging all of our equipment over the rocks. It took about a whole day for us to get just around this one rapid, but I think it was the safe choice. And the nearest hospital is a long ways away when you're out on the Ogooue River. So after paddling all day, you'd inevitably find some place to camp. And we had the chance to sleep in some amazing areas, on islands, on sand spits, in fishing camps, and in towns along the Ogooue. This site was one of my favorites. I, named it Hippo Island because as we were pulling up to the beach, there was a whole group of hippos that ran out into the water and splashed away, which was very exciting, but a little bit nerve-wracking considering we were going to be sampling those waters later in the evening. But every day you'd find a cool spot, you'd set up your tent, and then the real work began, which was sampling biodiversity. So after your camp was set up, you'd pull out the nets, whether it was a cast net or a seine net, and you'd start sampling the fish biodiversity. Every fish that you collect has to be identified, counted, and photographed. So we are spending a lot of time looking at these little fish. Now, while we're doing this, while we're sampling, processing specimen, we've got some of our crew cooking dinner. So taking photos of fish, wash your hands off, and feed up or fill up your plate with some food. Tonight's meal was manioc, some lentils and fish, and some red rice, which is pretty gourmet if you ask me. A little less gourmet when you think you've still got a little bit of fish slime and scales on your hands from the sampling, but inevitably you'd scarf down your food as quickly as possible because you'd get back into sampling as soon as you were done eating. Our goal was to sample for an hour during the daytime and an hour after sunset at each site. This would allow us to look at the daytime species and also the nighttime species at each site. And it was amazing to see how different the fish would be at 6 p.m. versus 8 p.m. And so we were able to do this standardized sampling throughout the entire Ogooue at 42 sites and really get a good idea of what was out there. And at the end of a long day's work, there was nothing better than pitching your tent and crawling into your tent on the bank of the river and listening to the river lull you to sleep. I never slept as well as I did on that expedition. But we had the chance to survey some really incredible areas. So as I mentioned, some of the forest streams are these black water, very acidic, tannin-rich streams. And And the fish you catch in an ecosystem like this are totally different than an ecosystem like this. This is a really small, muddy stream close to the town of Lasterville. And the fish that I caught here were totally different than in the forest. And so as we moved down the Ogooue, we were able to document different habitat types, day and night species, but also this longitudinal transect of the Ogooue from the headwaters all the way out to the coast. And we were able to see different fish communities as we moved downstream, site by site. Oh, and we caught a lot of fish. On this expedition alone, we caught nearly 10,000 fish, over 9,600 individual specimen, representing about 75 species. Now you may think, oh, that's not very many, but 75 species in 7 weeks is actually extremely high biodiversity, especially given our limited sampling methods that we employed on this expedition. And one of the cool things that we did was we used iNaturalist to log all of our data. So if you're curious about what we collected at different sites on the Ubui, you can actually log on to iNaturalist. All of this data is publicly available, and you can search our project, Africa's Last Wild River, or the Ogooue Megatransect, and you will find our data set. So anybody who's curious to study the Ogooue actually has all of our photographs, all of our GPS coordinates, for the entirety of the Ogooue drainage. So this is a really unique data set, very exciting. And if you're curious, log in and help us identify some of these fish, because still there are a lot of undescribed species that remain to be named, even in our collection. But of all the fish we collected, of all those near 10,000 fish we collected, I think the most incredible discovery we made on the Ogooue revolves around this species. Now, this is a snapper. It's a Guinea Snapper. And for those of you who aren't fish geeks like I am, snappers are typical marine species. They live in the ocean. Some species go into estuaries. Some species will move into rivers a little bit. But something's interesting and unique about the Ogooue. The snappers, the Guinea snapper there, go much further upstream than they do in any other river system. So rather than just going a few hundred miles or a few miles upstream, these fish migrate hundreds of miles up the Ogooue. We collected snapper 500 miles from the coast, and we have anecdotal evidence from local fishermen that they may make it 750 miles upstream, all the way to Franceville, where we began our mega transect. Now, what is incredible to me about this is that it shows how connected the ocean and the Ogooue are. That a single individual can swim all the way from the open ocean, all the way upstream, almost across Gabon in this giant river. Now, we don't know what it's doing in freshwater. Is it breeding? Is it just feeding? There are lots of questions that still remain to be answered. But what it tells me is that this is a highly connected ecosystem that, if it is disturbed, if that connectivity is destroyed, or if dams are built that block these migratory routes, that species like this snapper, which is culturally and economically important in Gabon, would likely disappear from the Ogooue. So I think in terms of the conservation importance, I think that it's really important to keep the Ogooue free flowing for future generations. Now, one of the things that I was amazed about on the Ogooue, and I went into this trip really focused on the fish. I wanted to go out there, I wanted to document the fish, I wanted to do the science. That was it. But I didn't really think about the opportunity we had. As we floated downstream, we were able to stop in almost every riverside community on the Ogooue. So we stopped in towns, villages, little tiny seasonal fishing communities, maybe with 1 or 2 families in them. And we had the chance to talk to people and see how they were living and live with them for a few days. And it was amazing how much they relied on the river. They'd wash their clothes out there, brush their teeth, they'd get their drinking water from the river. They'd eat mostly fish, freshwater fish that they caught from the river. They transported their goods on the river and moved about their country on the river. what I found actually most amazing was how attached their history was as well to the river. So when you hear a chief talking about the history of his village or its community, he will tell you how they came either up or down the Ogooue and where their relatives are on the Ogooue system. And so it was really interesting to me to get this local knowledge and find these local advocates for the ecosystem. And one of the things that I'm really excited about looking forward to the future of conservation in Gabon and on the Ubui in particular is when you're speaking with local community leaders, they understand the value of protecting the Ubui River. Just like they manage hunting, just like they manage forest exploitation, they should manage resource exploitation and freshwater. So I saw a lot of interest and support for freshwater conservation from local communities. And I think looking forward, as we work to develop freshwater protected areas in Gabon, these local communities are going to be a critical component of the equation. And honestly, I think the key to finding a solution that works for everyone and the ecosystem in Gabon. So in total, we paddled about 7 weeks. We covered over 1,000 kilometers and about 750 river miles. We surveyed 42 sites, documented almost 10,000 fish, and became the first team in 140 years to descend the Ugu River. What we found was a rich ecosystem home to some of the world's largest mammals, some of the world's most biodiverse freshwater fish, and some of the most incredible wild ecosystems remaining on this planet. I feel lucky to have had the chance to explore it, and I feel more lucky to have had the chance to kind of share those experiences, in part through exploring by the seat of your pants, but also here with you all today. So we finally made it to the Atlantic Ocean. This was the final stop for us. We made it to the sandy beaches, and I'll tell you, we were really happy and really exhausted. I was cheering and shouting, but I was also limping. The last week or so on the river, it rained constantly. We had developed trench foot because we had been wet for so long. Our expedition photographer had malaria, and we were just dead. We were so tired. But after a few days, we recovered and we were able to go and share our story with the Gabonese government and initiate some first steps toward freshwater conservation in Gabon. And speaking of first steps, these are our footprints in the white sand beaches of the Atlantic after we had paddled all the way across Gabon to study the Ogooue, to put it on the map and help share the story so that we can help protect this wild river. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for tuning in. If you're interested in our project, we've got a really great website at africaslastwildriver.com, and we're on social media as well. And I think I've got plenty of time for some questions, so let me stop sharing my screen and
all right, Joe, good stuff. Another trip down the river. I love these presentations. I learned something new every single time. You kind of ended off with, that last week was tough. Trench foot, lots of rain. It makes it hard to kind of carry on in those situations. You touched on it a little bit, why it's worthwhile, but take us into that explorer's mindset. Why put yourself through that?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I believe as a conservationist and as someone who's worked in Gabon for a long time that I've got a role to play in fighting for these ecosystems. I knew that if I didn't get out on the Ogooue and explore it now, that the dams would be built before anybody could get out and survey these ecosystems. And I wanted to get a really good baseline. So partially just I was really driven from a conservation standpoint. Also selfishly, it's the adventure of a lifetime. Of course, you're going to go and suffer a little bit to paddle down the Ugu River. I have no problem being uncomfortable for a day or a week or a month if it allows you to get out and paddle around a hippo or, catch that 30-pound snapper out of the Ugu River. there are just so many things to discover in this world, and I want to keep paddling down those streams, even if it is a little uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why not? Forest elephants, amazing fish species, camping on the sandbars. It looks like there's a lot of good times as you're making your way down with your team.
Yeah, we kept the morale up pretty good, and I think we also were very lucky because the rainy seasons were late, so it didn't rain the whole time. The water levels were low, which made our navigation a little bit easier. We only had a couple illnesses, we only had a couple injuries, and nothing too seriously. So, knock on wood, we were very lucky to be able to get down this river safely because the last major expedition on the Ogooue, they lost 2 people on the way up and 4 people on the way down. So, and by lost, I mean they died. So, I think we did pretty good.
Yeah, those are pretty good numbers. I think anytime you can bring everybody back is definitely a good expedition. So, yeah, tell us about these pack rafts. I mean, they obviously are super portable, super useful. What's it like to be spending your time in one of those pack rafts?
Well, we had 2 types of rafts. So we had a big gear raft, and then we had pack rafts. And most of the gear is in the gear raft, but then you've got these little teeny tiny pack raft, and I'll tell you, they're incredible. They weigh like 12 pounds. You can carry them anywhere, and you can take them down pretty substantial rapids. So one of the things that we were doing is, you get to a rapid and you safely pass the big raft, you might as well bring the kayaks up a few times and run the whitewater. So we were the only people out on the Ogooue doing whitewater kayaking, and it was really incredible. Getting to play around and explore and have fun in some of these unique freshwater ecosystems. So they're really cool. We were using alpaca rafts and an NRS 16-foot Grand Canyon style expedition raft. And one thing that I was actually thinking about recently was what a joy it was to have everything you need in your life in a contained boat.
Yeah.
So all of your problems, all of your issues, all of your stress, it's in that little boat. And the rest of the world just didn't matter anymore. And so a few weeks into the trip, you've forgotten about politics, you've forgotten about the pandemic, you've forgotten about everything outside of getting down that river safely and collecting those fish and what you're going to eat for dinner. So it really simplifies things and makes you appreciate what you got.
It brings me back to our rafting of the rapids on the Potomac River.
The good old days, right?
The good old days. Joe, there's one. Well, first of all, I think this question would be a great wrap-up one. What's next? You did the Mega Transect. Are you done? Good, done. What's next?
Well, this summer I'm heading up into Yosemite. I'm going to be doing some freshwater restoration work up there, which I'm really excited about. And I'm in discussions with the Gabonese government about returning to Gabon and, fingers crossed, taking over a research director position there in Lope National Park.
Wow.
So if that works out, it would be absolutely awesome, and I'd be able to keep my finger on conservation and on the Ogooue. And that's my long-term goal looking forward.
Yeah, make sure there's a guest room for me.
Make sure of it. You're invited anytime, Joe.
All right. Well, I want to end off. I just feel like we need to end with seeing your cast netting skills. I happen to have a video queued up. You did a little promo for us from the side of the river for Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So I'm just going to pop it in there. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Joe Cutler, and I'm exploring the fish diversity of the Ubui River in Gabon. And when I explore, I do it by the seat of my pants. Hey, looks like I've got something.
There we go. That was in Lasterville on the Ubui River. It's an amazing spot to sample. So if you ever get out there, give me a phone call and we'll compare notes on what we catch.
Very cool. One last share of the website, Africa's Last Wild River. Check it out. Great map data, great images, follow Joe on social media, follow the project, because I have a feeling it's just getting started. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. We can't wait to follow along, and of course, more live events from the river.
Thank you, Joe. Happy Biodiversity Festival.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joe. We'll catch you later.